I don't know where this trend started, but I have seen a couple women do videos where they talk about things that their exes did to them, but they still stayed in those relationships. I want to play along too. Now, I'm going to skip the most obvious scenario. Most of you have heard me share my story about how I was married to a narcissistic abuser. We were together for 5 years. Okay, we kind of know what the situation was there. But let's move on to some other guys that I dated during my whole pick me unhealed era. The very first guy that I dated after my abusive ex-husband was a personal trainer, and he was one of those dudes that was emotionally unavailable. He knew he was fine, and he knew he could have anybody. We were talking, and I would always set up dates because he only wanted to hang out at his place. Those dates would never happen. They would always fall through. But while I was in the midst of saying, hey, we should go here or have a nice weekend away, he'd be like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. One day, this was back when MySpace was huge, I noticed that he had some girl as his profile picture. I asked him about it and he was like, oh, it's just a joke with me and my boys. That woman in his profile picture wound up being somebody he was talking to. They went on to have kids together, and they're still together to this day. Now, at the time, I still didn't believe what he was telling me, but I also desperately wanted attention, so I just went along with it and kept trying to make myself believe, yeah, it is a joke. The second guy was a guy that I reconnected with because we had talked. He went to a different school and I went to a different school when we were teenagers, and that wound up not working out because he was just a walking ick. So this story is why I tell women to decenter romance, because when we reconnected when we were much older, I got caught up in this idea of long lost loves, reconnect, junior high school sweethearts, reconnect, and I was all wrapped up in the story and the romance of that. It just sounded like the perfect little romantic comedy. This man would go days without talking to me. Whenever I would bring up my concerns to him, my legitimate concerns to him, he would shut down and stop talking to punish me for saying anything. I remember I would wreck my brain trying to figure out ways to get him to understand where I was coming from, but truth be told, he just didn't give a fuck. He came to visit me. He was still living in a different state, the same state we grew up in. I had moved on and was living in New Jersey at the time, and he came to visit me. He didn't want to take any pictures of me. He didn't want to post any pictures of me. And whenever we did take pictures together, he kind of stood off to the side. He also shoved me in a Walmart parking lot when I was trying to give him a hug. Anyway, when my grandfather died, it was a super emotional time. My grandma was trying to accept what had happened. I told him, and he did not call me once that entire time. Something finally clicked on my head, and I let him know how fucked up that was, and I stopped talking to him and blocked him. He wound up stalking me for about 15 years. But at the time, in the midst of that relationship, again, because I was desperate to be in a relationship and caught up in the romantic sounding story, I stayed and put up with all the BS that he was dishing out. This next one was the lowest of the low in my whole pick me era. I am embarrassed to tell this story, but I feel like I must to help someone. I once dated a guy who was in a relationship with someone. He convinced me, like most men who get in situations when they're already in a relationship, he tried to convince me that she just really wasn't, the one for him. She really wasn't satisfying to him. They really weren't serious. And the funny thing with that is he was actually in a relationship with her, and it was public knowledge, and he posted pictures with her and seen with her in public. But my dumbass believed it wasn't that serious. I was truly the one he loved, although he never fucking told me that he loved me. That fucked up situation went on for 5 entire years. The next guy, this is where I learned the valuable lesson that birds of a feather flock together. It's also where I learned that I don't do blind dates. Don't fucking set me up with anyone anymore. This guy was a truck driver. I shouldn't even have to say anything else after that, but I'll continue. This guy was a 40-year-old man who was mentally still very much stuck in his 20s. I'm pretty sure his brain actually never fully developed, ever. I'll never forget, we were walking around in the downtown area, and I reached out to hold his hand, and he pushed it away and gave me this whole speech about why can't I just have space and be left alone and be myself. He never wanted to be affectionate with me out in public, but in the privacy of his own house, he was affectionate with me. And who wants to guess what that affection always led to? The lowest point in that relationship was I was literally broke. I was still very much trying to rebuild my life financially. Now, I lived in one part of town and he lived actually on a complete opposite part of town, almost like 30 to 40 minutes away from me. I was exhausted. I was working at a makeup store. It was late. I think it was like a little bit after 9. And that was a weekend that my kids were with their dad. So he wanted me to come over to his house. He didn't want to come to me because of the fact that he had to get up early the next morning, and what his pitch to me was, just easy for me to get up at 5 a.m., roll out of bed and go to work, than to get up at 4 a.m., and get ready and then anyway. I told him I do not have gas money to drive to my house, get my stuff, and then drive all the way to your house and then drive back to my house in the morning. I was like, I have enough gas in my car to tide me over until payday in a couple of days. He says with his mouth, don't worry about it, come on over. So I do. I get there. The next morning, I'm like, am I following you to the gas station, or are you just going to give me money? He looks at me flabbergasted and says, you don't have money to put gas in your car? Come on, let's go to this gas station. I followed him to the gas station. The whole way there in my car, I am in tears, humiliated, like, what the fuck just happened? This man put $5 of gas in my tank. Mind you, he had money. He wasn't lacking for anything. Then when he was pumping the gas, he didn't even speak to me, got in his car and drove off. And my stupid ass still wanted to be with him because, again, I was desperate to be in a relationship, and at least I had one. That relationship ended after he shut down after I brought one of my very valid concerns up to him, and he yelled at me and said, I need space. And my dumb ass said, how much space? And his dumb ass said, 2 months, and hung up in my face. And because, again, I was very much still very unhealed and male-centered. I called him repeatedly. He didn't answer. And then one day I just finally gave up and never talked to him again. He bumped into me at a mall and tried to act like we had ended on good terms. And I remember I walked away like, yeah, I'm not talking to you. That was the end of that. The next guy that I dated, again, why I tell women to not just decenter men, but decenter romance. We also reconnected after several years of having met through a mutual friend at a party. And I was just so caught up in, yes, we reconnected. This is a true love story. Now, the tricky thing about this man, this was my first experience with a man who legitimately made me believe that, wow, this guy really loves me. There was no red flags. He listened to my concerns. We had valid serious communication. He was very loving and kind and encouraging to me until he fucking wasn't anymore. Before things fell apart, I wound up getting pregnant. We were both excited about it, had plans to move in together, and that's when he started showing his ass. Some random day, we had a disagreement, and he called me, and I didn't answer. He texted me back that it was over, just abruptly. I wound up having a miscarriage, and he didn't call me. He didn't say shit. Turns out he was talking shit about me to his friends the whole fucking entire time. He was going around telling everybody that I was some crazy psycho bitch. The last guy was a social media content creator whose content is geared towards helping women, giving women warning signs and red flags to look out for. Long story short, when I dated him, I quickly learned that he knows red flags and signs so well because he is the fucking red flag and the sign. Oddly enough, when I tried to come out and share my story, the very women who were told to believe victims didn't fucking believe me and rallied to take his side. The difference in that situation is that I was recognizing the red flags a lot sooner and ended that situation a lot sooner.